The views expressed on the Jerry Cahill CF podcast are that of Jerry Cahill and guests, and not necessarily those of the Boomer Esiason Foundation. Nothing on the Jerry Cahill CF podcast should be considered medical advice. Such advice can only be given by a physician who is experienced with cystic fibrosis. The Boomer Esiason Foundation, Jerry Cahill and guests cannot be held responsible for any damage which may result from using the information on this podcast without the permission of your medical doctor. You're listening to the Jerry Cahill CF podcast presented by the Boomer Esiason Foundation and jerrycahill.com.
Welcome to Jerry Cahill's Living, Breathing, Succeeding podcast series. This show, How to Talk with Kids About CF and Help Them Become Responsible, Independent Adults, has been made possible through an unrestricted educational grant from Chiesi to the Boomer Esiason Foundation. Today you will meet Dr. Kelsey Finn, a geneticist, bioethicist, and empathy enthusiast. She received her PhD in human genetics from Johns Hopkins School of Medicine and completed her postdoctoral training in bioethics at Mayo Clinic. Dr. Finn has devoted a large part of her career to researching whether, when, and how to communicate about genetic conditions and health information with children. She's the author of the children's book, Having Cystic Fibrosis is a Lot Like Being a Superhero. Dr. Finn is passionate about helping parents, family members, teachers, and health providers navigate talking with kids about difficult topics.
My name is Kelsey Finn, and I just got married, so my name is now Kelsey Finn. And I grew up in Eau Claire, Wisconsin, and that's where I went to undergrad as well. I was always really interested in the medical field, and I didn't know if I was going to go to medical school or graduate school. But ultimately, I loved science and ended up, after college, pursuing a degree in human genetics at Johns Hopkins School of Medicine. What we kept hearing was these adults telling us that one thing that was really hard about having a genetic condition is that it's really hard to tell kids about that. Oftentimes, parents feel they want to protect their kids. They don't want to burden them with this information. They don't want to scare them. But on the other hand, it's really important for kids to know this information because not talking about it can actually be a lot more harmful than talking about it. I've talked with a lot of different families, parents and their child. And I think something really important that we found when we were talking with all these families is that parents tell us, I wanted to protect my child. I didn't want to tell them these scary things. And on the other hand, kids were telling us, I wish my mom would have, and I wish my dad would have given me more information because I knew there was more to it, or I already knew about this because I Googled it and they just weren't telling me, which kind of made me feel like I couldn't completely trust them. That can be hard to explain what cystic fibrosis is scientifically and, medically to a little kid. And it's really hard to know how much information to give and when. And, if a child just gets on the internet and finds out some of the aspects like the life expectancy and the male infertility and the lung transplant, that can be really damaging to a child. And that's really where the motivation for my book came from. So the book is called Having Cystic Fibrosis is a Lot Like Being a Superhero. So here it is. And in the book, Jack has cystic fibrosis, and he walks you through how having cystic fibrosis is a lot like being a superhero. So he talks about what cystic fibrosis is, which he kind of describes as cystic fibrosis means that my mucus is thicker and stickier than most people's. And then he kind of explains like his vibrating vest is his like superhero outfit. A lot of parents have told me, now I say, come on, let's put on your superhero outfit, and my kid is excited about it instead of running away from me. So it's really meant to be a kind of a launching pad for kids and parents to start communicating about CF. and can be used to introduce CF to young kids. The best time for parents to start talking with kids about cystic fibrosis really depends on the maturity of the individual child, and every situation is different. So as a parent, you really know your child best. Some children are more mature than others at the same age, so there isn't, a magical age or one time period that is the absolute best for everyone. Ultimately, you want to have gradual conversations over time. So this is not a one and done type deal. Ideally, you'd like to, just slowly introduce it and let your child kind of guide how much information you give them by asking what questions do you have. I think when families find out about CF, oftentimes they do go straight to Google and they're figuring out, how do I find the best doctor, and they're asking logistical questions of what do I need to do to take care of my child. But the part that's really tricky is when parents are first finding out about CF, there's no one saying, and here's all the logistical information you need, and then also here's how you're going to talk with your children or your child about this. At some point, we need to, make sure from a health provider standpoint that we're appropriately supporting these parents and giving them the resources that they need. And I think right now, the medical, from a provider standpoint, is not holding up. We're not taking well enough care of our families with CF in this regard. As a parent, I think the instinct is sympathy. I think that's kind of the, if you will, I see a bear and I want to run away, as opposed to I see a bear and I should play dead. I think as a parent, the instinct is to run from the bear or, to do everything for your child. And the harder thing, but the thing that's better for kids long term, is empathy. And, empathy is saying, I want you to start to be responsible for doing these things for yourself. I want to help you and I want to support you do that, but I want to empower you to do this yourself, because I want you to be independent and be able to go to college or be able to do whatever it is you want to do with your life. And I don't want you to need me. I don't want you to have to depend on me to be there to help you take care of your CF. The foundation of empathy is understanding. And I think that the world does need a lot more empathy right now. And I think if we can get more people to understand what cystic fibrosis is and what it means, my hope is that there will be more empathy for the CF community and people affected by CF. Parents can, really empower kids to become responsible adults by talking to them about cystic fibrosis, educating them about why their CF care is important, fostering independence and responsibility by practicing empathy instead of sympathy, and really just keeping the line of communication open and continuing to check in with your kids. What questions do you have? My goal with the books is just to really help parents and kids talk about this, to give parents some sort of idea of, what do I tell my child? How do I tell them? When do I tell them? Kind of answer some of those questions and, hopefully be a resource for families, because unfortunately there aren't a whole lot of resources right now, but I hope that changes. And I hope that from a medical provider standpoint that we can take care of our families better from, the emotional and communication aspects of having CF.
We hope you enjoyed the CF podcast. Be sure to like, subscribe, and hit that notification bell on the Boomer Esiason Foundation's YouTube channel so we can keep you up to date on our latest educational programs for the cystic fibrosis community.